Welcome, everybody. So today we have got Dr. Graham Dexter. And for those of you who don't know, Graham has been involved in the roller side of the pigeon sport for many years. And I'm really pleased to have him as a guest on the Pigeon World podcast. So welcome, Graham.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's great to have you. So for those of you who don't know, many will know, but for those of you who don't, if it was me three or 4 months ago, I wouldn't have known who you were. After digging, I know who you are now and learning as much as I can about the roller side of the pigeon sport. Can you just give us a bit of a history about yourself? Are you in out of rollers, you personally, and your time with rollers, if you would?
Okay, well, I've been with the rollers since I was 12 years old. I started with a few rough old tumblers, and then I was fortunate enough to meet one or two celebrities that were celebrities then in the hobby. And from there, I've sort of judged the rollers all over the world. A couple of years ago, I was the World Cup judge, which was great fun going all over the globe, seeing rollers everywhere. So I think at the moment I have no rollers because I'm getting old and looking after them started to be a bit of a problem. The peregrine was getting me down, etc., etc. Had I continued, it would have been my 60th year this year in rollers. So I guess I am a little long in the tooth. I have some very definite views about rollers and how they should be kept and what they should do in the air. And I'd probably upset an awful lot of people across the world because I am very much dedicated to watching quality Birmingham rollers, whereas a lot of people these days seem to think that anything that does a somersault can be called a Birmingham roller, and it can't.
So let's expand on that a little bit. We have spoke previously when I called to see if we get some of your opinions on more of the future of the sport, which we'll talk about later on. So I have heard some of these views of yours, but let's, for the benefit of people listening and watching today, give us those views. What's your take on what a true Birmingham roller should be, why it isn't necessarily as common as perhaps you would hope these days?
Okay. Well, the thing about the Birmingham roller is that it is an athlete in the air. And for it to be called a Birmingham roller, it must be doing somersaults in a particular fashion. And that, I mean, the whole thing is an optical illusion, but the bird should be holding its wings like this. At the worst that we should accept, it can be holding its wings like that. But essentially, the best pigeons hold its wings like this, and it spins with inconceivable rapidity for a considerable distance, like a spinning ball. That was Penston's definition many, many years ago, and I can see no reason to change that. The problem, of course, is that competitions can enhance the quality of a Birmingham roller, or it could detract from it. If you have a judge that will judge any pigeon that does a tumble, a loose set of somersaults, without the speed, without the velocity, without the wings in the right place, then of course you can get Birmingham rollers, or I would call them rollers, that don't roll with that sort of speed, therefore don't use as much energy, and will probably score you more points if the judge isn't looking for the quality. Which is why a long time ago, back to 1981, 82, we decided that to try to make the sport, the Birmingham roller, a quality roll, that we would add to the judges' score in terms of how many roll together in the 20 minutes, that we would add quality points for how many birds in the team were rolling near enough perfectly. and we said that they should be the most difficult points to earn. However, it seems these days that a lot of judges don't really do that. They just give everybody 30 points or 50 points. So it makes it a waste of time. If you're just judging how many birds roll together over the 20 minutes, and you're judging anything, then the inferior team will always win.
Mm. And have you seen a definite change in the quality of rollers over the last decade or so? Or is have rollers changed in their abilities? Has the good families, as you know, the good strains, have they been weakened? What has changed? Do you think it's the judging? I mean, again, I'm only new into the sport. The judging seems really very subjective.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's so many different elements. Like obviously, we know you've got weather on the day. You know, one day to the next could be very different conditions for judging a competition, but it does seem very subjective. But have you seen a definite change in the last 20 years of the quality of rollers you've seen or that you've judged or that you've just watched?
No, I don't believe there's been any change in the quality. There are still beautifully, highly quality pigeons around, no doubt about that. When I first started, and we're going back a long time, the real quality pigeons were only held by a few people. And to actually get your hands on those quality pigeons was not easy. You had to be in the circle, you had to be in the clique, you had to know somebody like Bob Brown or Bill Barrett. And if you didn't, then your chances of getting them, even if you had a lot of money, was not really possible. So in those days, you'd go around and you'd see a kit of pigeons, and you'd see perhaps 8 or 9 really high quality pigeons spinning properly in those people's hands. The rest of them would be mediocre, but nice enough to watch. As the time went on, more and more high quality pigeons were in more and more people's hands. I have to take a little credit for that, because I did bring an awful lot of pigeons to the north and distributed them very freely. And now, of course, you've got Newcastle and Middlesbrough that are hotbeds for really high quality Birmingham rollers. The thing is, there are more good quality pigeons in a lot more people's hands, but the competition, if you don't have the right judge, encourages people to put mediocre pigeons in the air. As long as the judge is prepared to give points to birds that aren't spinning properly, then it's just a matter of looking at the bottom of the score sheet to see how many points you've won. Whereas for me, all the way through my life, it's been watching these beautiful birds spinning perfectly that gives me the thrill. I've never cared what the score is at the bottom of the score sheet. Just for me, on a daily basis, to watch these magnificent birds, it's been all about what Birmingham Rollers has been for me. Sadly, I think some of that's gone. And I think partly because the competitions encourage that, the scoring encourages that, and because a lot of judges, well, not to be too harsh on them, probably have not had the pleasure of seeing really high quality kids. That's all I can say, really.
Fair enough. There seems, and again, with my limited knowledge, there seems to be a disparity between scoring points in different competitions, different rules. I went on my first fly 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it was apparent the scoring was different to that of something else that people within that area of club they were used to. and that adds into my outside looking in viewpoint that there seems to be, it's quite fractured. There's not one set of rules. What's your take on the different scoring elements of competitions depending on what competition you're entering into? Like if this particular one, I think I'm right in saying if two pigeons weren't within the kit and you had eight pigeons rolling well or together simultaneously, that didn't count because two weren't in the kit. And to me, that seems quite unfair these days, especially when three of the seven flies that I experienced on that day were hit by birds of prey. So to not score anything because two pigeons weren't within the kit, that seemed quite unfair. You got any thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, believe me, I've got thoughts on everything. You name it, I can give you my opinion. At the out, you're talking about the outbird rule. The outbird rule was brought in not in the UK, mostly in the States, because there was at that time anyway, a lot of people decided that the kitting was very important, that the team holding together was very important. I take your view. Why do you penalise the seven brilliant birds for the two that are outside the kit? If you don't breed pigeons that kit well, you're going to lose points anyway. Because if the kit doesn't keep together, it can't score big breaks. So you're already penalising yourself if you're breeding birds that don't kit properly. To actually stop judging because there's two birds misbehaving for whatever reason seems nonsense to me. You could argue that the Birmingham fancier should know his team and take out any birds that don't kit. But at the same time, I've got to say, I once had a team of pigeons that had a bird that consistently came out. And the great thing about that was when it came out of the team, it doubled back and came back into the front of the team. And as it approached the front of the team, it spurred the birds to roll on and make a big break. And people said that was wrong, and that was almost like cheating to keep a bird like that. But the actual visual spectacle of a lot of birds spinning properly in a 15 or 16 birds spinning perfectly in good style. I'd breed with the pigeon like that all the time. But yeah, it doesn't make any sense to penalise the kid for two that's out. But that's just my view. Other people would argue that you should breed pigeons that kid. It's priorities.
Mm, mm. Okay, so moving on. So I got your book finally a few weeks ago, which I must admit I haven't had time to read yet. But it's Winners with Spinners. This is the third edition that I've got, and pretty much everything. This is everything you think and know about rollers that anybody should get if they're getting into rollers. Or I've had people on social media saying they go back to it often and dip in and out of it. People that have been in rollers for years. Not having read it yet, I'm looking forward to it because I know a lot of people have said it's one of the best books I'll read. What prompted you to, in a world of rollers that isn't as publicized as I would like to see, being a new fan of rollers, what prompted you to write the book? Is it just to distill all of your knowledge, or?
No, definitely it wasn't about my knowledge at all. When I wrote the first edition to that, it was because I was aware that there were very few people writing. Pensom's book was the only book really that was out there that people could read. And Pensom's, although it's a great book, is like his articles sort of put together. It wasn't done very systematically, and it was one man. I could see that the fanciers that I'd grown up with, that I love very much that had the best birds in the world for me were getting older, and they weren't writers. They weren't going to write all the things. Their knowledge was just going to go. When they died, that was going to be it. So that was what prompted me to write the book, to go around and interview all these people and to document their views, and then to integrate it into some kind of systematic way so that the novice or the experienced fancier could read that and see their views and their ideas and their ways of rearing their birds and training their birds and feeding their birds was going to be available to them for years to come. Since then, of course, yes, I have added some of my ideas. I've also interviewed other people with different ideas. I've tried to augment the book, in the second edition and then this final edition. This final edition was basically my swan song, if you like. I'm not going to write anymore. I'm probably not even going to write any more articles unless people beg me. So it was my views as well, and some of my stories that I've collected over the years. Some humorous, some poignant, some of them ridiculing myself, but essentially to freshen up the text, to add a few of my more recent interviews and articles, and that's my goodbye to the hobby, really.
Okay, very good. Right, so we've got some questions from people. I posted out that I was doing this interview with you, and a few people got back on social media. So we've got some questions, if you wouldn't mind. We have Rob would like your thoughts on winter feeding. What would you say on winter feeding? This is Rob W. Sawyer asking this question.
Oh, to be honest, if you're flying your birds over the winter, then you'll need to give them mostly carbohydrates, basically a wheat or barley type food, but you'll have to add a little bit of seed, which will give them a bit of warmth. Maize, a lot of people don't like maize, but maize is a nice warming food to overwinter with. But the thing is, if you are flying them, then they'll need plenty of carbohydrates and only a little bit of fat and protein. 11%, you've got to give 11%, but 11% protein, I mean. But then most wheat has 11% protein anyway. But if you're not flying them over the winter, then feed them anything you like. The mixes that you can buy will have everything in them that they need. But bear in mind, when you bring them out to fly again, say in the spring, you've got to thin them down before you do that. Otherwise, you'll have pigeons crashing all over the place.
Thank you. Next question is from Kevron Barnes. As a beginner and new to rollers, it will be interesting to find out your advice on starting up and building a family of birds.
Okay. Well, the first thing is to educate your eyes. You have to go around and see what you like. Because I'm quite happy to tell you what I like, and I'm bang on about quality, but your money's as good as anybody else's. Go round and see what you like. Go to as many flies as you possibly can. See as many fanciers as you possibly can. And whatever takes your fancy, those are the birds that you should be buying. Once you've acquired some, and please buy from reputable breeders, not from some of these, magazines that you can get that advertise, or there's one, I think the British Bird or something, that actually advertises pigeons from my stock. They don't exist. You can buy all these imaginary pedigree birds from these journals, and they just aren't real. So go and see someone, watch their birds, buy from them, and then you can buy a kit and then fly that kit and see which ones turn out best, and then pair your best 3 or 4 pairs up from the team that you've bought, or buy yourself 2 excellent cockbirds and 6 excellent hens, and breed polygamously, and again fly and fly and fly, and pick out the ones that meet your eye, meet your quality expectations. Unfortunately, you're going to have to breed a lot of pigeons before you find the birds that suit you. But the better birds you buy, then the better birds you will breed. It's really as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, I've quickly realised it's a numbers game. Sideways to the question, but added in from my experience, my limited experience with rollers, but I'm bringing 35 years off and on with racers. Obviously, very different type of pigeon, but some of the principles are still the same. And I've always said within the racing game, and I've got no reason to believe it's any different for rollers from the basic principles, is you start with genetics. That's the fundamentally, if you know, the idea that it costs to feed a rubbish bird as much as a great bird, but you've got to go with genetics, which is where I started asking around who's got the best rollers and getting people's opinions. And we know what they say about opinions. Everybody's got an opinion, you know, but you filter it out and you see. Then it's the management and the feeding, which I'm learning a lot about. I'm already been warned, and I can see coming from the racing side of pigeons, feeding is going to be a big thing for me because I'm not used to the feeding regime of a roller. The rollers I've got here at the moment always seem extremely hungry. And with racers, that's not necessarily the way you want for them to be kept all the time. So the management and the feeding side of it, you've got to get right. Because if you don't get that right, you can have the best pigeons in the world genetics wise, and they're not going to perform. And then it's conditions and location, which is even more, well, location is relevant on both sides of the pigeon sport, racing and rollers. Obviously, you've not got the location of training as such like you have with racers, but the training falls into the management, really. You know, how often, I've got many different people's opinions on how often you should train young rollers. And again, it's working out what you think fits with your own, you know, logic and sense of what you want. So, but for me, definitely, Kevin said about he's starting up. I've gone through that. I'm going through that experience now, and I already know that come the end of the year, I'm going to have too many rollers. But I'm all right with that because this is not even my foundation year. This is my getting going year. Next year will be my first proper year. I know that if I want to fly 2 kits of rollers at any one time going into year 2 or 3, whichever you look at it, i.e. an old bird kit and a young bird kit, I've got to start with significantly more than I want to end up with. I've got too many now within the plans of where I'm getting birds from, but I'm all right with that temporarily because I know when I start flying them out, even before selection process, I'm going to lose some because of the birds of prey issue, and then you'll start selecting down over a period of time. So for me, it's going on from Kivon's question. It's a 5-year plan. And I'm not saying at the end of 5 years I'll be any good, but I'm giving myself 5 years to at least have a stab of being any good. I've got no interest in competing until I'm half confident I've got a kit worth looking at. Now, that being said, I still get an immense amount of pleasure just watching them. I don't have to be competing to get the pleasure. I look forward to. I remember the first time I ever saw a roll, and it fascinated me, and it was one pigeon on its own. So I'm not. I've got that 5 year plan to try, but I'm a I'm the type of guy that is keen to do the best he can. So at some point, I'll want to compete. Um, but it's going to take time. And for me, starting with the genetics and then learning the management is the two keys, really. Because to a degree, you can't do much about your location. Most people are where they are. They can't really move just because of roller pigeons. So you've got what you've got. So yeah. So thank you for that. The next question we've got is I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. It's Debert Souza. It's a health related question. The dosage is as compared to larger breeds of pigeons. This is an interesting one, actually, because this is something I've had in my mind. I'm, again, you're not wishing to go back to races too much, but you get a lot of dosages for racing pigeons, but a roller pigeon's at least half the size. So his question is, or their question, sorry, I don't know if you're a man or a lady. Health-related questions, dosages as compared to large breeds of pigeons, medications and the effects on performance, and any proven supplements that you would give, and the flying in a humid environment was his questions.
Okay. Well, you can't do very much about your climate, your humid climate. In terms of dosages, basically, whatever the dose is for a racing pigeon, you want to halve it. And then you'll have basically your veterinary surgeon should be able to tell you the milligram dosage per ounce. And the average weight of a roller pigeon is between 7 and 10 ounces. Seven ounces is the, if you like, the competitive weight. 10 ounces is what you'd expect over the winter if you're wintering them. So
that's a big chip. When you put it like that, though, that's a big difference in weight, percentage wise.
Yeah.
When you say it like that, it's virtually a 50%, on top of non-competing weight.
Absolutely, because you said a few minutes ago that your pigeons always seem hungry. What you've got to remember with the Birmingham roller is it's an extremely good actor, and it will kid you that it's absolutely starving, when in actual fact it's reasonably well fed. When you start flying it, you'll see you put the extra ounces on, and it'll stop rolling. So basically, it's doing nothing in the kit box will put weight on it, but its athletic weight will be a lot lower. I don't believe in starving pigeons to get performance out of them. Over the years, there has been a lot of people that have literally starved their pigeons to get the maximum peak performance out of them, because the lower the weight, the likelihood that they'll be spinning faster, until you start to weaken them to the point where they can't fly. I don't believe in that. I think you should breed the pigeons that are vigorous and healthy, and they can take a little bit of if you like, reducing the weight to get them optimum athletic performance. It's a bit like somebody who's running a marathon. They won't want any extra weight on them. And a Birmingham roller for a competitive weight needs to be that sort of athlete. But yeah, there is a big difference between if you keep it sitting in the kit box or if you're flying it every day. Not that I recommend you do fly them every day, by the way.
What would you recommend in an ideal world, not with no consideration of birds of prey issues and what have you, but in an ideal environment, what would you suggest is your take on off-season flying and on-season flying? Well, how often should they be flown?
The young birds are different to old birds. So youngsters, while they're developing, need to be flown every day. As soon as they start rolling properly, then every day will exhaust them. So you need the balance is always between enough exercise so that they don't go overweight, and enough rest so that they don't get exhausted. Get them absolutely so fit, you might lose the roll altogether. So I know that sounds strange, but it's true. So with young birds, I would fly them every day until they start developing, and then I would probably fly them every other day, or I would start to split the kit up and take the ones that are performing and fly them every other day or every third day, and the ones that haven't yet developed, keep flying them every day. So there's all those intricacies to that. All birds, depending on whether they're a good kitting team or not, you could, if you've got a really good kitting team, you can afford to fly them only once a week. Twice a week would be what I would want, because I would want to watch them. In fact, Dave Mosley, people have always said to me, you fly your birds too much, Graham. And it's true. I did used to fly them too much because I enjoyed watching them. But of course, fly them too much, you'll lose the performance.
Thank you. Our last question is from John Kuzos. A few questions actually from John. He's one of the first to respond. He was very eager to ask some questions. You've kind of touched on it a little bit already, but I'll repeat the question that John's asked. Your take on birds today, as to the quality of birds, is it improved as compared to the old timers, the legends? I used to have Bob Brown line of birds, and I'd like him to explain what he saw in Bob's kits compared to today. I'll take these questions individually, so we'll go with that one first from John, if that's all right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But there's more Birmingham roller fanciers. That's the first thing. So there are more high quality birds, undoubtedly. What I saw in Bob was a fabulous trainer of Birmingham rollers. I just do not know how he managed to get them to the peak performance for the competition day. He was just absolutely brilliant at that. I remember going to see him. Some of these stories are in the book, but I remember going to see him one Wednesday, and he flew a team for me, and I thought, oh God, Bob, this is probably the worst team I've ever seen at your house. On the Sunday when he flew them, they were brilliant, absolutely
Same
brilliant.
Team.
What he did?
Team.
Sorry,
it was the same team.
Yes, the same team.
Wow.
Absolutely the same team. I mean, I couldn't believe the difference between the Wednesday and the Sunday. I don't know, nobody knows exactly what magic he had, but he certainly knew. I remember going to see a team of his once, and he said he put this team out, and they were a young bird team, and they were okay. They weren't brilliant, but they were okay. There was certainly some good quality birds amongst them. And when they landed, he said, what did you think to theirs? I said, well, probably not as good as I expected to see, Bob. He said, yeah, he said, they're youngsters. He said, but they'll be better next time you see them. And I said, how's that then? He said, won't get fed until they start rolling properly. So that was certainly one bit of magic that he used to use. But yeah, his birds were a family, so they were all the same size and shape. So they tended to roll together. They tended to roll with good speed. Some of them were a bit dangerous. So the problem, of course, is always getting a pigeon that is safe and doesn't injure itself by rolling erratically, but at the same time rolling enough so that it's a spectacle to enjoy. Bob seemed to have that down to a fine art. Yeah, I like Bob's birds very much, but I never knew anybody that had Bob's birds that could fly them like he could. People spent hundreds and hundreds of pounds at Bob's, and you'd go and see the same birds in a different location. Didn't even look like they were Bob's birds. Amazing, really.
It's the management and the training we were talking about, isn't it? The genetics are there, but it's different. It's his knack of managing them. Thank you for that. The next question from John is he'd also like your opinion on feed, how much to feed on fly days, a kit of 20, and how much to feed on non-fly days.
Well, if you look at the book, there is a few sort of recipes, if you like, for non-flying days and flying days. But essentially, it's when they land that you have to think about what you're going to feed them. A lot of people don't take into account the weather conditions. If you've got, really cold days, you'll need to give them more. If it's hot, sunny days, got to give them less. When you're trying to get the right feed for your particular family of birds for a competition day, there's only one way to do that, and that's to experiment. So you definitely won't give them as much on a non-flying day as you will on a flying day, but probably you're talking about if you're talking about 20 ounces, a 20-ounce tin of wheat, you'll probably be taking 3 tablespoons or 4 tablespoons out on a non-flying day. And then you've got to watch them. Are they getting overweight on that? And if they are, then you need to take more out on the non-flying days. So it's all about observation. If you don't observe the birds, see, I can't tell you, I can only tell you what I would feed my birds, but my birds will probably be a different size and shape and different family.
Yeah.
Different genetics than your. So you've got to try to calibrate to your own birds, and you'll do that by how long do they fly? Are they panting when they come down? If they are, they're probably overweight. Are they still energetic when they come down? Are the cockbirds still bouncing and trying to pair up with the hens? If that's the case, then yes, you're feeding them too much. All these are observable signs that you need to be aware of in order to measure the amount of food that you're giving them. So it is very much an art of observation. And if you observe your birds, they will repay you with good quality performance.
Thank you for that. His next question is, noticing most flyers are flying on straight wheat during training. Before competitions, they're on straight wheat leading up to fly competition day. Does he agree with 2 days rest, and does he recommend longer?
I do recommend 2 days, at least 2 days rest. Again, depends whether you fly the young bird team or an old bird team. Old bird team can put up with more rest, more lock-up, to get more performance out of it, provided it's a good kitting team. If it's a bad kitting team, you probably have to fly them every day, especially with this outbird rule that, we've already talked about. The feed, there's all sorts of different feeds that you can try. Depurative will take weight off the birds. That's certainly one of the things that a lot of the fanciers seems to have done over the last few years. They've got good results with depurative. I've always flown on mostly just wheat and reducing the amounts to get the different performance out of them. A lot of people are starting to use barley now. That's fine. But again, you have to calibrate to your own birds. How well do they do on barley? The thing about barley is if you feed it to them for too long, they tend to lose altitude and rake, sort of fly in wide circles rather than tight circles. Again, it's a difficult question to answer because you have to calibrate your own birds. But yeah, definitely resting, definitely reducing down the quantity of food running up to the competition, but increasing to its normal ratio the day before. So in other words, you don't want the birds, if you're cutting down the food running up to a competition, you don't want them to be on that low calorific diet just before the competition. So you would probably start to build it up slightly, and I'm talking minimal amounts, tablespoon at a time, coming up to the competition so that they've got the energy to do the performance. Don't know if that makes any sense, but
Yeah,
you can
definitely.
you can read all that books.
Great tips. Right, some other general questions outside that I've got for you. What would you say the best family of rollers you've ever seen, whether it be yours or other people's? Whose would you say are the pinnacle of all of your decades of being in the sport? What was the? We mentioned Bob Brown, and this is not like, I mean, there could be more than one, obviously, but who would you say you've had the best family, or what was the best family of rollers you've ever seen?
And from my point of view, Ollie Harris had the best birds, undoubtedly, the best, fastest, tightest spin of them all. Bob, of course, and Ollie used to swap birds, and so I could say the same with Bob's. Bob wasn't quite as fanatical, perhaps, as Ollie was in terms of his genetics and his keeping his family together. Bill Barrett, of course, had a very strong family of birds. Coming to more recent days, you'd have to say, obviously, you can't discount people like George Mason, whose family of birds goes now back decades. You have Bill O'Callaghan, had some fabulous birds. Mostly they were from Ollie Harris's family. You go further north, and you've got Les Bazants and Dino. They actually originated as a cross between my family and Barry Shackleton's. But an excellent family of birds. Probably not quite as good on kitting as some of the other families. You go further north, and you've got people in Newcastle that have got birds from lots of places, but brought them together and brought some nice pigeons together. Maurice Hole, of course. Maurice Hole was just a brilliant stockman. I can't honestly say that he had a true family, although some people will argue he did. But he had his birds stolen nearly every year. Every season he had his birds stolen.
Wow.
Maurice would take birds from me, from Les, from Dino, from George Mason, from anybody. We'd all donate birds to him. And then within a couple of seasons, he would have built them all together, and he'd have a fantastic family of birds that you could watch. So he was a marvelous stockman. These are the people. When you look at Bill O'Callaghan and Maurice Hole and Les Bedant and George Mason, these and go back further to Ollie Harris and Bill Barrett. These were stockmen. These people knew how to gel the genetics together and pull a family together to get the performance they wanted. They're brilliant people. Better than I ever was. George Mason paid me a compliment back in the 80s. He said I'd got the only true family of Birmingham rollers then, because I had genetically sorted them and they were like peas in a pod. But I'd have to say I wasn't the greatest breeder of pigeons. I just had in my own vision exactly what I wanted a Birmingham roller to be. And I would do experiments, bring pigeons in there and that and the other, but essentially they had to do the job in the air for me. I didn't really care how pedigree they were. The 80s was different. I did have a nice set of genetics then.
Speaking of pedigrees, again, coming from the racing world, there are still great racing pigeons with little or no pedigree. But 3/4 of the pigeons you buy, if not a little bit more, will have a pedigree. And of course, we know that unless DNA is involved, any pedigree could be written for anything. So that aside, it strikes me in the roller game, pedigrees are few and far between, which as somebody that's a geek when it comes to records. Like the rollers I've got at the moment are already on a spreadsheet: ring number, sex, color, where they're from, what strain they are, any notes on them. There's not that many people put pedigrees with rollers, and that baffles me because some people I've come across it in racing. I know the pigeons. I don't need pedigrees. Well, that doesn't bode very well for long-term genetics and keeping track as to what is what. I've been speaking to a racing guy called Ken Easley who used to be in rollers in the States, and he sent me a pedigree of his principal stock cock and hen from back many years ago. And in that pedigree, you got birds going back to the 50s. And I suppose I like seeing that history. I'm a big fan of history in the pigeons, any of the pigeon sport. But why do you think pedigrees are not really a thing in rollers? Because to me, if you can take the time to catalogue where things are from, and that's going to make it a lot easier down the line to identify the genetics that are working, and also to preserve the history as well. I know a few flyers give pedigrees with their pigeons, but not many. Got any thoughts on that as to why in the roller game pedigrees are not really a thing?
There's only George Mason that gives pedigrees, as far as I know. Most of the reputable breeders don't bother. A lot of that is because they can't give a pedigree because they flock breed rather than have the birds locked away. Les Bazance, I know, still has individual breeders, but there's not many people that do. Once you have your family of birds that are tried and tested, trusted breeders, a mistread means very little in rollers. The pedigree is useful so that you can get into the breeder's head and see how they related relatives, how they bred relatives to relatives. That could be quite a useful thing to look at. But essentially, rollers has never been an individual breeding pen type pigeon. And whether that's because fanciers can't be bothered. I know when I had a pedigree family, then I had separate boxes, but I gave that up because it was too much bother, and I was doing very, very well, thank you very much, without having to write pedigrees out and know what I was doing. When other people ask me about, well, what should I pair to that? What cock should I put to that hen? I could tell them, and then they were on their own, because who knows then after that, after the first couple of pairings, it's anybody's guess unless you've been watching the offspring in the air to see whether you're going in the right way or not. I'm not sure that that's terrifically helpful. It's certainly not much use for somebody who wants to have a pedigree breed, but it's the reality.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there one fly out of all of the thousands, if not hundreds of flies you've seen competition-wise? It doesn't even have to be a competition. What would you say is the one fly that sticks out in your mind after all these years as to be the pinnacle fly that you think that was the best ever that you've seen?
Well, apart from my own, you mean?
Yeah.
Because, if you can't say that the best team of pigeons that you've ever seen wasn't your own,
yeah, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, you're doing something.
Yeah,
wrong.
outside of your own.
Well, it would be very difficult to say the one. I can remember so many, and I'm not saying that my memory is clouding, but they sort of merge into each other. the national team that Bill O'Callaghan put up, although they were too high really. They were a brilliant team. Big breaks. I mean, you're talking 17, 18, 19 birds breaking together in perfect style. That was something to watch. Many, many evenings I've been at George Mason's and watched some superb, absolute superb pigeons, teams of pigeons at his. Bob Brown, of course, Bill Barrett. I remember judging with George Mason, a team at Bill Barrett's that were absolutely out of this world. Made 16, 17, 18 bird breaks over and over and over again, almost to the point where George, I was marking, George was judging. George said, "We better stop marking these pigeons now because nobody's ever going to believe this score." And so you know, there are those that stick in your memory. But I saw a yearling team at Les Bazant's about 4 years ago. Unbelievable, out of this world. I've you know,
many. Well, it's good that you shared some. Obviously, with how many you've seen, there's lots, and one was probably the not fair to ask you, but you've highlighted some of the ones that stick out in your mind over these years, which is great. Thank you for that. So a couple more.
I must add one thing that we in the north we had a 12-bird old bird competition, which was probably the best rollers I ever saw for a whole season. And Dino Foster put a 12-bird old bird team up, which would blow your mind, was absolutely out of this world. I don't think there was one pigeon in that 12 that wasn't rolling perfectly. And I wish I could share that with everybody, to see a team of birds like that. Unbelievable. So if I was going to go back to one, if I had to choose one, it probably would be that 12-bird old bird team, which was unbelievable.
There you go. You've picked the one, and this leads into something I was going to mention as well. Like, it's a shame to me that more of these flies are not captured, because it would be great to be able to see that. You know, I did my first videoing of the qualifiers a few weeks ago. Not great. I'm still getting used to it. And the equipment I'm using, I'm using a good phone, but it's still not. It needs to be tripod based and a bit more suitable equipment. But I think it'd be great for more of these to be, even if it's just people using their phones, video these flies, because you're gonna, again, it would be great to see that fly you just mentioned, those 12. You know?
Yeah. I quite agree. But then, funnily enough, the camera just, you know, they say the camera doesn't lie. Well, it certainly does for me. You look at so many videos of Birmingham rollers and you think, really? See them with the naked eye is so much more fun and enjoyable. Whether that's because they really are just an optical illusion, I don't know. But I've yet to see any video that really captures the Birmingham roller in its spectacle.
Well, let's hope technology will make that more possible over time. A couple more questions, if that's okay.
Of course.
Some would say this is a weird one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you think your professional career, your professional life, has helped you with rollers and the psychology of the training of them and how the birds think? Do you think that's?
I can tell you the reverse is definitely true. My early career as a psyche nurse, some of the most stressful, awful months of my life, and coming home and letting the team out saved my life probably. Would have been a depressive, I think, if I hadn't had the birds to help me. So certainly the other way around. Answering your question, I think being a psychologist has helped me not be too offended by some of the comments I've heard from people. It's helped me understand how frustrating the hobby is and how to combat that. My chapter in the first edition on the psychology of the Birmingham roller person, I think sums up an awful lot of stuff that went on, and I was able to capture what I meant by the psychology of the Birmingham roller fancier. It
I
helped
need to
me.
get a first edition.
Well, it's repeated in the third edition. You can read it. I don't think I've cut very much of that. Things like not having rose-coloured spectacles, not looking at the best birds rather than the worst birds, things like that. That psychology is helpful. If you're not careful, especially when you're judging, you can if you pick out the worst bird in the team and let that affect your judgment of the other 19, that's good psychology to know about. And not also to pick out the very best bird and let that affect your judgment of the other 19. That's good psychology. That's helpful.
Interesting. So it's interesting as well that you started that by saying that the pigeons probably helped save your professional life, because pigeons have been a massive help to me mentally through some bad times, and for me personally, they're my release. I spend all hours of the day in front of a computer or thinking about work or whatever it may be, and when I go out to the lofts, that's my time out. And I think people underestimate the real benefits of having these birds in your life, because they are a release when you're dealing with them or you're watching them fly, even if they're flying not particularly well. It's that release. It's that break away from thinking about life and whatever else is going on. Tremendously powerful.
I couldn't agree more, Mark. That's absolutely bang on. As I was reflecting back on when I was a staff nurse on the mother and baby unit, and you had to be absolutely 100% observing the patients all the time. A lot of them were trying to poison their babies or strangle their babies or feed their babies milk with bleach in and all sorts of stuff. And the stress of that and the concentration that you had to have. And I'd come home, let a team of pigeons out, and as the pigeons hit the air, all my stress went with them. And that was a marvelous thing for me.
I'm not in a position yet where I'm flying any roller pigeons, but I'm looking forward to being in that position relatively soon. But I shall have my cup of tea, or if the weather's nice enough, a beer. I shall have some music on in the background, and that will be my happy place watching them fly. And I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you for that one. Right, so kind of a last question, all-encompassing couple of questions, really, if you don't mind. One last question. How do you see the future of the roller sport? We touched on this on a conversation we had a few weeks ago. Obviously, we haven't discussed it publicly, so I wanted to touch on this for the purposes of everybody to listen to and watch. Again, coming into it, it's not as promoted even as the racing pigeon side of the pigeon sport. And that isn't promoted anywhere near as much as it should be or could be. But certainly, there is no weekly or monthly magazine as such. And I think actually, in many ways, I've talked about this on podcasts before, and I'll say it again for people that haven't heard it. With the racing pigeon sport has declined. And I keep talking about racing pigeons, one, because I'm in it, and two, because there is there's a parallel in some ways to the roller sport. But in 1988, when I was, you know, a young kid, there was 60,000 members of the Royal Racing Pigeon Association, and there's 18,500 now. It's in massive decline, and that will reach a point, that organisation, where there's a critical mass, and I would guess that's around 10,000 people. And the numbers are declining. And the trouble with racing pigeons is it's so expensive to start properly if you want to compete. The costs of training the pigeons, all of the treatment, especially if you want to race abroad now, vet bills, this. And so to me, the role of pigeon sport seems a lot more accessible. To get going, minimum you need is a little kit box. Great. In an ideal world, you need a kit box or two and an 8x6 shed for some stock pigeons. It's pretty much all you need. You know, like a 10x8 space is all you need pretty much to do to get going with rollers. That's a very different ball game with racing to do it right. It's cheaper to buy good genetics to start. You know, the most money I've paid for a pigeon at the moment was £75. Or you're struggling to get, in some cases, good young birds to race, to try and race in the racing game. It's cheaper, it's more accessible, it doesn't need as many resources. And like, I didn't know before I started that you could compete at world level, in theory, national level, European level, world level, sitting in your own garden. That blows my mind. I didn't know this until I got into it. When I first heard the phrase World Cup qualifier, I'm like, what's that all about? And that is a tremendous benefit that the roller sport has got. If you want to compete, and I've been a fan of racing. I'm not doing down the racing pigeon sport in any way. If you want to compete at international level, you're looking at a minimum of 10 years. Realistically, a massive amount of cost getting the right stock, and pretty much do nothing else. And I'm not saying rollers are any easier from the management point of view. They're not. But it is more accessible. So what's your view of the future of rollers? How can more people... Why is it not as publicised? And what can be done to change it? Like, again, we spoke... Why is there not at least a monthly magazine? You know, we have the 2 weekly magazines here in the UK for racing. There's just doesn't seem to be any movement. There's not a movement in place to promote the sport. And there should be, because it's a great hobby. Yes, it's got its issues, bird of prey issues, one of the biggest ones. We all know about that. But what's your take on the future?
Well, the problem with me is that just approaching 72, I've probably got a bit pessimistic. But I would really, really hope that the Birmingham roller survives and thrives. I would love that. I'd like to think, go to my grave knowing that the hobby is going to expand and continue. The Birmingham roller is a sitting target for the peregrine falcon and the sparrowhawk, and the same in the States, all over the world, I suppose. The Americans may well save us in the end, because they are very well organised. They are, generally speaking, not wanting to put anybody down, but generally speaking, they're better educated. The more educated people in the States write their articles. They do have their magazine, which is quarterly and is full of articles. And so they may be the salvation for the Birmingham roller, providing they get their heads around quality. And as for the UK, it's probably just as popular now, just as thriving as it was when I first came on the scene back in 1964. And I think it will continue that way. think the National can do more to publicise it a bit more. I think if it wasn't for the fact that you may find some of the animal rights campaigners might. I think one of the reasons that the Birmingham roller has been under the radar for so long is because a lot of people are frightened that the animal rights campaigners will say it's wrong to keep breeding pigeons that are, they would say, deformed. That they, this acrobatic stuff is all about epilepsy, blah blah blah, which I don't agree with. So I think people are frightened to make it too public, and I think it will continue in that way for many years to come. The peregrine falcon, until somebody starts to campaign against the peregrine falcon and the sparrowhawk and the birds of prey being so prolific, we're in trouble. But while there are still people like myself and George Mason and Dave Mosley and Les Bizant and all these people still breeding good high quality pigeons, Barney, my good friend in Sheffield too, Bill O'Callaghan, still breeding brilliant pigeons. While these people, Mark McGlory, he's a, if you like, from my point of view, a new starter, but Mark does really well, flies really nice pigeons. There's a lot of people now still flying good pigeons, and while that continues, then there's hope for the future. But I think we've got to sort the peregrines out, otherwise, personally, can't see us getting any further. Because we're a sitting target. At least the racing pigeons are flying past somewhere. Once the peregrine latches on towards a locality, it's breakfast, dinner, and tea.
The argument of racing pigeons is it has multiple gauntlets to get through on its way home, rather than with rollers, at least what you're dealing with within the vicinity. Whereas on my first ever fly, as I may have mentioned to you privately, I saw a kit go up, and then a few seconds later a peregrine appeared, and then a few seconds after that a racing kit just was bombing it pretty much over the lofts, and we all thought this kit's going to get hit, but the peregrine went for the racing kit and smashed the racing kit to pieces instead. I don't know whether the idea of its on a rollers are a little bit more unpredictable in their direction, although that shouldn't matter to a peregrine.
It doesn't matter once the peregrine gets to know the roller. It always takes the best roller. People say it's always taken my best roller. The reason that the peregrine takes the best roller is because once the peregrine knows what the roller does, then it's going to have a much better chance of taking a roller that's rolling deep and fast. That's not going to be able to snap out of its roll and escape.
It is practically, it's the biggest threat any of the pigeon sports have got. I'm a lover of all animals, exception of rats. I haven't got any time for rats at all, but apart from a rat, and birds of prey are, great. They're majestic animals, and I've got no problem with the natural cycle of it. What I have a major issue with is the artificial breeding stations that are being put up. In Leicester at this particular flight, there's a peregrine nest site 2 miles away. Well, it doesn't belong in Leicester. That's what I have a major issue with. And the RPRA, again, going back to the racing side, they're trying their best, but they are fighting organizations with a lot bigger budget, a lot bigger legal representation than they could want to have. And I really don't know. I posted on Facebook a couple of days ago a young bird of my son who races, ripped from neck to lower abdomen, just literally sliced open. I've sewn her up. I think she'll be all right, but just terrible to look at.
Yeah.
And when I was his age, you didn't have that. You had, Coxie Canker, PMV, and yes, you'd start with perhaps a kit of 30 odd, and you'd think you'd have done bad if you'd finished with a young bird kit of 25. Well, now you've got people breeding 60 just to get 30 to the first race. It's all over. It's a massive problem. And I'm somebody that's solutions orientated, and I'm be damned if we know what has to happen. We need to get the artificial nesting of these things lowered or knocked on the head. And I'm not entirely sure how that can work and happen, to be honest. And it's like I posted a couple of weeks ago, maybe it's time to fight fire with fire. I was looking at European eagle owl, which has been, which I've led to believe is the only natural predator. It's completely illegal to let one go. And you have to ask why they're not allowed back in. I mean, there's an argument that they're not native. Well, they were native to areas of North and Scotland. But I don't know is the answer. You're fighting powers. It needs something pretty radical. And then all of the, there's all these webcams. I'm going on a bit of a rant. There's all these webcams, live webcams of peregrines, and people are missing the amount of rings that are in the nests. Well, each one of them rings represents one of our birds that is no longer with us. And you put your heart and soul. Doesn't matter if it's rollers, racers. My son, he's put his heart and soul into raising these young birds, and he's only got a small loft, and I'm just hoping that he'll be able to have enough to compete properly with, and it's a gauntlet out there. And yeah, there's an argument for rollers. It's worse because when the peregrine or the sparrowhawk knows where they are, just sit and target. I don't know the answer, but we've got to find one.
Well, wish you the very best of luck with that.
Yeah.
I really do, because I think that's the future of the pigeon hobby, wherever you are.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to leave it on that type of note. What I do want to say is thank you very much for you taking the time. I think it's been a fascinating insight. Somebody that's been in it for 60 years now, you said, or it would have been your 60th year this year. I like these types of discussions because one, a lot of people will learn from them. People have asked questions, and two, it gives that insight to new people starting. It'll get out there. I'm sure it'll have hundreds, if not thousands, of people listen to it. And thank you again. It's been really good, Graham, for taking the time to do this.
My pleasure.
Much appreciated. Thanks again.
Thank you.